report A, ought not to pass. Chair recognizes Representative Blumenauer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request roll call on legislative motion.
Representative Blumenauer is looking at requested roll call. So she will be requesting a roll call. Roll call is in order. The member may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for the roll call. So the day before he passed away, the Honorable Death of Angela Coca, which roll call this bill, and I'm glad that as of right now I will be haunted forever by one of the most fiery people I've ever met in my life. Our prison systems are in many ways the epicenter of the very harms that Democrats often say that we are committed to ending. One is racism. There's no clearer example of racism than you would find in our prison system. The blackest community I've ever found in this state is in our largest state prison in Warren. That is not a result of anything other than racism. We know that black men are no less or more likely to commit crime than any of their white counterparts. Another one is poverty. Virtually everyone inside our prisons in Maine lives in poverty and did so before their arrival in prison. Nearly all of them had appointed counsel because they were indigent. There is a reason that there are almost no wealthy men in Maine State Prison. And because of policy decisions repeatedly delayed or poor policy decisions made by members of this legislature, that's us, the state of Maine has for many years, decades in fact, failed to adequately fund and staff our indigent criminal defense system in this state, a clear violation of our constitutional obligations. Another one is misogyny. As indicated by both of the chairs of the Judiciary Committee during one of the work sessions on this bill, it is well documented that here in Maine, judges and juries are punishing women who are victims of domestic violence and sentencing them to longer prison terms for killing or hurting their abusive partners than they are sentencing the abusive partners for killing and harming the women that they're abusing. Think about that. Men who kill their wives are being sentenced to less time here in Maine than the women who are victims of domestic violence who act out in self-defense and harm their abusers. I suspect that this speech will be followed up by other speeches asking, but what about the victims? Countless victims of violent crime came forward in the committee hearing to support this bill, myself included. For now, though, I would like to briefly discuss one woman in Maine who is a victim of very profound harm. She was tortured and held captive by her husband for years. She was repeatedly raped. She was forced to kneel on a hard kitchen floor while her husband stood on the backs of her legs. She was beaten by him all the time. She was isolated from her friends and family, moving many times over the course of several years. And worse, she was forced to watch as her abusive husband did all of those same things to her daughter. He repeatedly raped her daughter. He stood on the backs of her daughter's legs. He beat both of them and isolated them both. He kicked his wife while she was carrying groceries and accelerated the car while she was buckling their young child into the car seat. When her daughter ultimately succumbed to her injuries, what did the state of Maine do? We arrested this poor, tortured, abused woman, charged her with murder, and sentenced her to 48 years in our Department of Corrections. She got only slightly less time than the man who actually committed all of that violence. There was no evidence presented at trial that she engaged in any physical harm of her child. Without meaningful reform like parole, this victim will serve decades behind bars, and her surviving children will never see their mother again outside of a prison setting. In fact, as I understand it, she is currently prohibited from having any communication with all of her surviving children. A form of torture, in my opinion, in and of itself. As a mother, my heart aches for her and for her children. She deserves an opportunity to apply for parole. It is beyond time the state brings parole back. Please follow my light and the strong light of the Honorable Jeff Evangelos and support this big step towards a more just system. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Any questions? Acceptance of report A. Is the House ready for the question? Chair recognizes Representative Ruff, Representative Henderson.
So, this was a bill that was debated at length. I feel like I say that a lot. Maybe we just did judiciary enjoy debating things at length. But it was debated at length. As you can see in the reports in front of us on page 29 of the regular calendar, there's not really a general consensus anywhere on which way we should move forward, other than obviously the majority report, which feels as though recognizes that it's just simply not ready for prime time. If we take a look at parole itself, it was established in the state of Maine, I think it was in 1913. And then in 1971, Maine's 104th legislature passed a law that created a commission to prepare a revision of the criminal laws. At that time, there was kind of a nationwide movement on absolving parole in general. And the commission completed its work in 1975, a time during which there's a nationwide movement. To put things in context, and one of the reasons why I really wanted to hit the pause button on this, it's not that I'm completely opposed to parole. I don't really know if I am or not. It feels as though it's just not the right time for me. And although that term I feel is used a lot in this building, and sometimes it's overused, right? The bill's not ready for prime time. But to underscore that, when parole itself was absolved, when we as a state of Maine, 2 years before I was born, but the legislature decided to absolve parole, they did it very thoughtfully, very carefully, and very delicately. And this commission that they created was a 4-year commission that looked at the entire swath of things in front of them and created a structure to move forward on. That 4-year commission met a total of 45 times. Now, I belong to the Right to Know Advisory Committee. I'm very thankful for the appointment, Mr. Speaker. I've enjoyed my time on that. And we put a lot of time and effort in 2025 into that, and we only met 4 times in some subcommittee meetings. But for a commission to meet 45 times over 4 years is a significant commitment. That's almost once a month. They heard from a ton of stakeholders, dug into this, and they very carefully and thoughtfully found a way to absolve parole and move forward with our new sentencing structure. Now, if we were to take a look at how where we stand now, in 2022, there was a commission established by the legislature to reestablish parole that met a total of 5 times. And here we are now in 2026. There was also a few committee meetings from the Criminal Justice Reform Committee Commission, I believe, as well, has a little bit talked about this a little bit. But even, let's say, throw in a few of their meetings, it's still less than 10 meetings to try to reestablish something that is going to be a significant growth in government, not only from a more bolstered parole board, but we would also need parole agents, that's not the correct term, but parole officers, thank you, but parole officers that we would also need to hire. So when I say it's not the right time for me, the truth is this really isn't ready for prime time. And again, not only to underscore that, not only for how it was absolved in and of itself over 4 years and 45 meetings, but the way in which we're going to establish it can't even be, doesn't even have a general consensus. And that's reflected in 3 minority reports, where we have 4 members of the legislature on Amendment A, we have 3 on Amendment B, and 1 on Amendment C. So there seems to be, again, a kind of a divided idea of how we need to move forward in implementing parole. So it just simply isn't ready. Thank you.
Chair recognizes the representative from Westbrook, Representative Salisbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand in support of the pending motion, and I just want to clarify a statement just made by the representative from Rumford. The Criminal Justice and Public Safety did a lot of work last session on this. We had a major public hearing and work sessions about it. We did a lot of work on it. We heard a lot of testimony, and we did do a lot of work on this. But I'm still, again, in favor of the omnibus. I don't think that this bill is ready to move forward. And again, I do always stand up and say, what about the victims, the people that are in prison that have been sentenced to life? I won't go into their crimes, I've already said that before on the House floor, but we owe it to the victims, the families, because except for one, their victims are not alive, to their families, those people. We've heard a lot today about your debt to society. Their debt to society is life in prison. And so I think that looking at retro parole is not something that I would ever be in favor of. I hope that we do still have this conversation going forward and look at maybe prospective parole, but I'm in support of the correct law to pass.
Chair recognizes
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, honorable colleagues. I guess I wanted to rise and just clarify why I will be voting in support of this motion. The Judiciary Committee did work really hard on this bill, I think because many of us consider it to be a really important policy area that we want to advance, and in the end, this bill has got pretty close to being there. For me, I continue to have two specific issues around implementation, which is why I ended up on a report C to establish a very narrowly focused study group to examine two things. One has to do with the intersection of parole and probation. In 1976, when parole was abolished, it was done so in the course of a comprehensive look at creating a new set of sentencing practices, and this bill doesn't address how those two systems will interact, and I think there are structural problems with that that might be rooted in separation of powers issues, and so I would want that to be really carefully looked at. It's a solvable problem, it just needs closer examination. The other one has to do with the question of whether it should be applied retroactively or prospectively. There are a lot of questions on that, and really the committees have an opportunity to do a deep dive on that. I mean, we heard about that. It came to our attention as a result of the testimony of one person that came to the public hearing because the subject was focused on, and there are important considerations and action on both sides that could use a more thorough analysis. So for those reasons, I am on report C in hopes that we can get a study funded so that there is staff and we can move this forward in a really positive way for the ones that we learn.
Chair recognizes Representative Carrick from 7th through 7th.
I am in support of the current motion, and I just wanted to share what we learned through our extensive discussion, that it became quite clear during the committee proceedings that the judicial branch and the Department of Corrections were not involved in this recent process. Again, 5 meetings to come up with this new system. And that is a process. The Department of Corrections and the judicial branch needs to be heavily involved in whatever we decide to implement if there's any changes going forward. But this legislation would create a whole new system, a new board, a huge requirement of money, time, staffing, and there would be an inherent conflict with the current probation proceedings and the parole offering. The Maine Prosecutors Association testified that sentencing structure already includes provisions for the intentions that are behind this bill. They highlighted that the parole program would be in direct conflict with our current probation structure. And for example, there is already 4 programs that help our incarcerated individuals get out a little bit earlier if it's possible. There are split sentences where convicted individuals do not serve the full sentence. There is the probation. There are good time laws where a sentence can be cut by 30%. And then there is supervised community confinement program where the individual can serve the last 30 months of their sentence in that program. And the supervised community confinement program actually helps train individuals to get back into society, which is good. But parole would just send them out. There's obviously a concern for the victims in that case as well. So it should be clear that this bill does not affect sentencing also. So there was a parallel made that if, for example, there was, let's say, for example, a 24-year sentence, and the individual who's incarcerated had good time and community confinement and split sentencing, there would only possibly be a difference of 2 years or so that this new bill would change the amount of time that they are serving. So for all of the costs, all of the time, the extensive new programming that would be required, it really would not have that much of an effect. So, thank you.
Chair recognizes Representative Blueville, Representative.
Speaker, I'm a little confused by what was the good representative from Carrick just said, I'm not understanding, I guess, where that 2 years came from, but I did want to correct the record. She indicated that the requirements for SECP were better somehow than what we required for parole, because it trains people to get out, which is not exactly correct. The requirements that are in the bill for parole are the same for SECP, so the potential parolee would have to meet all of the same requirements laid out in the SECP statute. In terms of the life sentencing issue, there are many men in our Department of Corrections and some women as well who have lived so long in incarceration that they have their surviving victims. We have an entire nursing home style pod at Mountain View Correctional Facility where this is sort of weirdly inappropriate, but when I walked into the nursing home pod, I laughed because it's insane. It's absurd to me that we as a state have decided it's worth our time and energy and resources to keep these men incarcerated when they very clearly present no risk to the public. And in addition to that, Maine State Prison has a hospice where men are currently dying and being cared for by fellow residents of the Department of Corrections. So I just want to reference those two things. Thank you.
Chair recognizes the representative from Auburn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have tremendous faith in Maine's judicial system, but with that faith, I have a full understanding that it isn't perfect. And the criminal justice system are imperfect and makes mistakes, including when it comes to sentencing. 44 states have parole. And the reason for those 44 states having parole is that there's sort of a general acknowledgement that we make mistakes. And it's been far too long in Maine that we haven't had a similar system that can acknowledge that sentencing is imperfect. It's not an art, it's not a science, it's to some degree an art, and a very strange art. And it's clear from this report that while the majority of it is an ought not to pass, that the majority of the committee supported some form of parole. And I personally support the second report, but any of those reports would be better than what we have in the status quo.
Any questions, acceptance of report A? Is the House ready for question? Chair for the vote, Secretary Smith-Chamber. With all that voted, Chair will vote for the Chair. We'll double the Chair will vote. 74 voting 7 for the affirmative, 7 for the negative, motion fails. Chair recognizes Councilmember Secretary.
Speaker, I move the House accept report B, also passed as amended by committee.
Representative from Falmouth, Security, moves to pass report B, also passed as amended by committee. Chair recognizes Representative from Scott Egan, Representative Warrior.
Mr. Speaker, I request roll call.
Representative from Scott Egan, Representative Warrior, requesting roll call. Submission of requesting roll call is in order. Any questions, acceptance of report B? Is the House ready for the question? Chair recognizes Representative Scott Egan, Representative Warrior.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll make this quick. I think we've all decided where we're going on this, but I've been on judiciary for 6 years and we've been dealing with these parole issues. And I just want to acknowledge a person that has had an impact on my view of this bill. She's taken me aside a few times to talk about her situation, and as a young girl, she witnessed the murder of her Bryce. The man who killed her sister was still eligible for parole because he was sentenced before 1976. And she told me about the process. Every time, the family had to relive that terrible night when she watched her sister be murdered. It opened up the wounds. It changed their life every time. It was like fresh, a new crime every time. I don't think any family or village should have to go through that. We can say that we want to have rehabilitation or things like that. And in some cases, yeah, but when you take a life, other people live that. Like it is today or yesterday. So I honor those victims and families, the things that they have to relive that we can't comprehend. And I can no way, shape, or form
Chair recognizes Representative Bluehook.
I just wanted to appreciate so much the comments from the representative from Scott Regan. Victims, though, are not a monolith, and there are so many victims who came forward in the testimony on this bill to support this policy. And not only that, the Maine Coalition Against Sexual Assault also came out in support of this policy. I also wanted to say that while sexual assault is different than homicide, I know that it's a much different crime. There is a person in this state who goes to visit the person who murdered her son almost every week in our Department of Corrections. So parole is a nuanced approach. It doesn't allow that everyone in our Department of Corrections will get out. It doesn't even say that most of them will get out. It just says there should be a chance given to the people who have done the work to redeem themselves during their period of incarceration so that they may go home and be with their families. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Pending questions, acceptance, Chair recognizes Representative Westbrook, Representative Salisbury.
And every time, thank you, Mr. Speaker, every time that happens, those victims that are still alive and family members will have to know that that might be a possibility, that process. So that's part of the current, some of the bill language talks about the family members and victims, if they're still alive, would be made aware that that person has applied. So.
Chair recognizes Representative Rowe, Representative Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would vehemently disagree with Representative Bluehill and state that victims in the state of Maine absolutely are a monolith. As defined, would mean that the victims in the state of Maine they are a large, uniform, and powerful organization or system that lives here in Maine. They have voices in this chamber, they have voices in this state. They are a monolith. Thank you.
Any questions, acceptance, or report B? Is the House ready for question? Chair will vote, start terms to the chamber. Have all now voted? Chair will vote, Chair vote. 54 voting through, 94 to negative, the motion fails. Chair recognizes Representative Bellman, Representative Kuhn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to third time this charm. I move that House accept report C on task submitted by committee amendment B.
Representative Bellman, Representative Kuhn, moves House to report C on task submitted by amendment B. Chair recognizes Representative Scott Egan, Representative Poirier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Request roll call.
Representative Scott Egan, Representative Poirier, request for robust petition. Roll call is in order. Pending questions or acceptance of report C is the House ready for question. Chair will vote, start terms to the chamber. First call of absentees. Have all now voted? Chair will close vote. We're going to hold chair has voted. 77 voting affirmative, 71 negative. The motion fails. First reading bill. Representative Bellman,